So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, maybe we'll start with you, Steph, to give us kind of a rundown of your career, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll go on to Rashi, and then we'll open it for questions.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting, Catherine, and it's so lovely to see everyone. I haven't met most of you, but I actually run the Xoogler network in New York. So if you are in New York or you're on the East Coast, please definitely send me a message after this, and I'll make sure that you get added to our events and our distros. Okay, my career. Honestly, to me, not that interesting, but maybe it'll mean something to you, or maybe something I say is going to resonate with you. So I basically graduated from college and then went immediately into Google, spending 12 years there on and off. And in between that time, I took, I think, maybe a year and a half off, or maybe 2 years off. And, it's been a really incredible ride. I started off at Google in people ops when it was like, the company was maybe 5,000 people max. We were sitting in the offices in Mountain View in the office parks, and helped it watch and grow the company to, what was it when I left? Like, it was like maybe 60,000 when I left, right, in 2016. And after about 8 years in people ops and doing basically business consulting within people ops, and communications training, all sorts of different process work as well, and product development. So for example, I was part of the G-Hire team. I'm sure that some of you may use it still. I don't know if it's still around. I assume that it is, but basically was part of the landing crew that helped to build and G-Hire from the ground up. Cool. So did a lot of things in people ops, 8 years there. I was like looking around, what do I want to do before I leave? I was really burnt out. And I was like, I want to go work on a product. So I actually went over to Google Fiber, and instead of working specifically on fiber, I worked on Google Starbucks Wi-Fi and the first generation of Google Wi-Fi called OnHub. So I don't know, for those who remember the access and energy kind of boom days, but it was a really exciting time to be there. And I built support operations for them, and basically rage quit after that. And so that's part of my story too. I'm happy to share about that if people have questions about what it's like to break up with something that you have been involved with for a decade, right? Like a job, and how that feels. But that sent me a little bit on a quest, right? Like this soul searching moment where I was really asking, who am I? What's the kind of impact I want to make? So I got involved with a nonprofit. I started doubling down on this nonprofit, and just to keep myself busy and keep my skills sharp, and do something that was impactful, because I was really missing that connection to mission. And then a startup asked me to join as a product manager, so I did. Glint is a really fun company. It's an HR software for those of you who aren't familiar, and eventually it was acquired by LinkedIn, but I realized ultimately that that wasn't the right match for me. I think my headspace was just like in a really, really big rut, from my long compressed time at Google, right? Pressure cooker environment. I'm sure so many of you know that. I know Catherine, Rashi, and I were just talking about that a little bit earlier. So, and, realized I needed more time off. So I took that time. I really focused on healing. I really focused on that mental health. And in 2018, I had lunch with a friend in New York, and she was like, well, you're not doing anything, so you may as well come work for me at Jigsaw. And for those of you who know, Jigsaw is, basically a part of Google that focuses on keeping the internet safe, digital security, privacy, and civil speech online, right? We're sort of like their big bucket areas, or some of them at the time. And it was great. I got to come back to Google. I did 2 more years there, and I said, okay, now what? Right? I've done, like, I need to now stop, contracting with Google as a consultant and go and get a, proper job. And, you know, I had a few conversations, and then I had a really great conversation with the New York Times. And so now I'm at the New York Times. I started there as a program manager, eventually became a director in program management, building a team of 6 people. And then now have moved into what we call operations, which is sort of like a chief of staff role, specifically to the person who looks after the subscriber experience. So as you know, the Times runs on subscriptions, and we want to build a great experience for people who subscribe. So that's where I sit now.
Terrific. Thank you, Steph. I'm definitely going to come back to the breaking up with Google point. But let's give Rashi a turn to tell us her history.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks again for having me. It's lovely to meet everyone here, Googlers, Xooglers, who have you. And Katrin, thanks so much for hosting and having me on. My career started very similar to that of Stefanie's. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rashi Singhania. I'm originally from India, from a place called Calcutta. That's where I was born. And then my first job straight out of college was Google. They were recruiting in my university at the time, and they had a very strict kind of, those who are majoring in economics who are invited for the interview process. And I was majoring in English literature, and Chaucer was my life. And I was like, oh, they're not going to want to talk to me. And so my then boyfriend, now husband, came in and he said, did you know Google is recruiting in your university? And like, why aren't you going for the interviews? And I was like, are you crazy? Like, they don't want to talk to me. But I'm glad he convinced me, went and interviewed. Fun 7 rigorous rounds of interview. I think 7 now feels like a very small number compared to what the rounds look like today. But got through. And at the time, I think they were just recruiting a bunch of kids to go to ad policy and do ads kind of approval process to understand what our policies were. Went on to do several different roles at Google. I was there for about a span of 4.5 years. And during that time, I did a lot of essentially what we did, like account management, and did advertising and optimizations for a bunch of different clients and advertisers, specifically in the, I see that more people from Calcutta. Hi, Trisha. Nice to see you. And so, yeah, so I did a lot of, like, as I was saying, account management for a bunch of different advertisers for Google, specifically in the automotive sector. And I focused a lot in Australia and New Zealand as markets. And so had a terrific career there, learned a lot about Google Ads and SEM specifically. But I think one of the biggest reasons why I was kind of looking out and what kind of led me to my next role was really understanding that when people are hiring for products and figuring out how to do marketing for complex products, they want someone who's a more what we call traditionally a full stack marketer, and someone who understands products even outside of Google, because that's not the only platform. And I certainly was in a learning curve in my career where I wanted to go and test myself and figure out, could I really survive in a world that was not Google? And could I really survive in a company that had to leverage different marketing channels and strategies where the bulk of investments was not on Google Ads alone? And so this is a time between 2010, 11, 12, if you remember. So in the India market, Google was not the biggest platform for ad spend. It was one of the platforms, but not the largest. And so I went on to join a then startup called Flipkart.com. For those of you who may not know, Flipkart is essentially modeled on Amazon. So they're an e-commerce platform today. They're one of the largest e-commerce platforms of India. They compare to Alibaba in Asia as well. They ultimately went on to have a $16 billion exit and got acquired by Walmart. I was the third hire into the marketing team. I was essentially hired to run all of their paid ads, which was Google Ads, but also a lot of what was then known as Facebook and Facebook social media marketing and retargeting and all that stuff. And so did a bunch of different roles there, learned immensely. From being the third marketing hire, we went on to scaling a team of 25 marketers in a span of 3.5 years. When I joined them, I think we were at 5 million GMV. By the time I left the company 3.5 years later, we were at 60 million. So those numbers are crazy, crazy growth stories, learned a lot. And I was also very, very burnt out with that kind of a life. And so I took a break. I traveled around a bit, went to New Zealand, traveled a lot between Australia and New Zealand. And I'm so glad I did that. And I took that break in my career early on. And I studied in New Zealand as well, made a very different lifestyle. And I can speak about what New Zealand is all about. And then ultimately found myself coming back to the Bay Area. I joined a boutique agency called Firewood, which is now a part of a much bigger media company called Media Monks. But Firewood, if you're aware, I don't know if many folks have worked with Firewood, but it's one of their 2 whitelisted global agencies for ads marketing. So I guess the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Did a lot of marketing for a bunch of different Google products. One of the predominant ones was YouTube ads for SMBs globally. led a team of about 10 marketers and analysts, and we did a lot of demand generation and B2B marketing for a bunch of different products. And my most recent role was at Striver. It's a startup here in the Bay Area. I was started at Stanford. Striver does VR training for employee training for large enterprises, and we essentially sell to Fortune 1000 companies. I joined them as head of growth, and I was there for about 2.5 years, leading a lot of their demand generation and account-based marketing strategy, essentially partnering with sales to build pipeline. And I'm currently in between jobs. And I guess my last note on that is that I think I've found that my biggest fit is around startups. I really enjoy it, and I can speak a lot about what I find fulfilling in a startup life. And so I am joining the startup space, and since I haven't joined them, I can't share a lot of details about them, but it's very much in the space that I operate in, which is customer acquisitions for enterprise. So, yeah.
Awesome. Lots of good stuff to follow up on there. I want to go back to this theme of breaking up with Google, and this is kind of for both of you. What is it, making the decision to leave Google? I understand the burnout point, but when you think about leaving, what goes through your mind, and then also what change do you experience on the outside? You have, less attention, less resources, less micro kitchens, like all the perks and all the goodies, but also from a how you do your job, less resources, everything's on a shoestring in the startup space, at least. So tell me about that transition. What were the pluses and minuses that you had?
I can go first. Yeah, for sure. The decision to break up with Google is a hard one. And I can tell you that the first 4.5 years I was there, this was in my early 20s. Life as a Googler is a very privileged one, and there's a lot of big money, big budgets, better life, better compensation, which gives you a lot of affordability in life that other companies don't. And this is how my friends and my peers in my world kind of viewed me, as a 20-something-year-old who gets to travel to some international destination a couple of years, has a golden G card. I don't know if it still exists. There was a Google corporate card that you got. Got to stay in very fancy hotels, got to go to, big meetings with the heads of marketing with Honda and Jaguar and Kia and the big advertisers of the world, and a very glitzy, glamsy world, right? And a lot of the folks back then around in my world, so if you're familiar with the Indian market, 9 out of 10 folks are engineers, and they have very hard lives, and they study really hard and to get into jobs, and they don't get the kind of compensation that a kid who did English lit and did marketing at Google, the compensation, the pay parity was just not there. And so I think my eyes really opened up in speaking to people around in the world that, you guys have a very easy life, and Google's a very easy life, and you have a very privileged life, and come out to the real world and we'll see that you really have any metal or substance or not, and kind of like an open challenge. And I think that played in my mind a lot. I think sticking with so deep into Google products, especially in Google Ads, and knowing every single feature, functionality, how to use the platform for different marketing objectives, I just felt like I knew a lot. I'm kind of a T-shaped marketer, but only in one product and platform. Knew a lot about analytics, knew a lot about ads, but I questioned myself that if tomorrow a company were to come and tell me that, hey, I'm giving you like $1 million in ad budget, go build me the company and help marketing solve my business problems, would I be that person? And I think the resounding answer in my voice was no, that's not me. And I think that that's the thing that I craved the most. I think it was a bit of a FOMO, and it's a little bit of an imposter syndrome that I'm as good as Google is, but it's, in a certain sense, Google is an easier product to sell. The brand sells itself. But can you walk in through the door and really make a pitch for a product that people are not aware of, and really have them understand what problems they're solving for people? And so I was speaking to a lot of people, and during the time there was a trend because Facebook was opening up their offices in India. They were hiring a lot. They were also going in the ad space, and so competing head to head with Google. And so a lot of my peers and colleagues were making their way into Facebook, but also a couple of these mobile advertising companies that were mushrooming in India back then. And I wanted to do something different. And I had a chat with an engineer friend who said, well, if you really want to challenge yourself and you really want to test your skills and level yourself, go work at a startup and then we'll see. And so for context, this is back in 2011, 12, and startups was not a thing. This is like people sought out big, risk-averse, high-paid jobs in, big companies. And so I joined Flipkart and I was like, what does Flipkart do? And they were like, they sell books and they're modeled on Amazon. Like, do you know what Amazon is? I was like, a little bit, like not a whole lot. And so I think it was very nervous kind of getting out of Google, but also this insatiable need that if I don't do it earlier on in my career, my biggest fear was that I'll stick around at Google for the longest time because the benefits and comp is so fantastic that life becomes extremely comfortable. And I will find a comfort zone that the longer I stay in it, the harder I will find to break through. And so I kind of just decided to take the plunge, and I was still super young and I was like, let's go learn and up-level myself. And I used to describe this thing as falling from the skies, coming out of Google and going to a startup. Like, you have no idea what hits you. And so I can speak a lot about that journey of what we learned. But if I were to kind of in a nutshell tell you about pros and cons, I think that I enjoy the startup space because it constantly challenges me. And every role I've taken on is something where I've had about 40% of things I've never done before in a previous life. And that's where I still turn to seek out in my next role. For example, I've done a lot of demand generation, account-based marketing, and the role I'm getting into has a lot of PLG in it, PLG motion in it, product-led growth. And so I think, it's a hard decision, but I think if you want to kind of really test your boundaries and see how much you can learn and push yourself, it's the best learning ground. It's very uncomfortable and it's very hard. Candidly, I've cried and sobbed in these roles and walked out and said that they're not going to hire me. I'm the wrong hire and I don't know anything. But the best learning ever. So yay for startup on me.
That's amazing. Yeah. And then for what it's worth, fall out of the sky. I called it taking a running leap off a cliff. So I absolutely agree that the startup experience is all those things and more. Steph, your turn.
Yeah, I think I have a pretty quick answer to this, which is what prompted me to know it was time to leave. Well, I think I was probably 6 years overdue. So my first stint at Google was a decade long, and about 4 years in, I started to get burnt out. 6 years in, even more burnt out. 8 years in, I made, a small change over to product. And then, when I finished, so we reached this point in the product launch process for OnHub where I could either keep doing it, right? Or I could make a change. And I knew that I couldn't keep doing it because, as I mentioned, I sort of had a little bit of a toxic situation happening where I was, at least, my relationship to work. And I decided, I don't see anything else here. The only thing that's booming in 2016 is Google Cloud, and that is not what I want to do. And so I apologize to those of you who maybe are from cloud. I know how big cloud is now, but that was the thing that I looked around and I was like, I gotta go. And luckily, around the time that I was leaving, I had a lot of other people in my same tenure group who were also leaving. These people who had sort of seen Google through this big growth period, right? Helped to scale huge operations and programs and had grown a lot from that as well. And we were all just kind of looking around like, yeah, we're all a little bit unhappy here. And I think that we should do something about it. And so I did leave, but I did, as I mentioned, also have a plan, which was, I know I'm going to take time off and I'm going to spend this time just reconnecting with something I'm super passionate about. And so I ended up volunteering with an organization called Minds Matter San Francisco, which is an educational nonprofit in San Francisco that focuses on helping low-income high schoolers get into top four-year universities. And a lot of young adults were a part of this organization, acting and serving as mentors. And I came in on the older side of the scale in my early 30s, being like the wise elder in the room, which is wild, right? Like now I'm looking back, I'm like, wow, like it's kind of crazy to think that I was the elder in the room. And so that was my soft landing. That was the thing that kept me a little bit grounded as I was figuring out who I was without Google. And I'll tell you something funny. Like my mom sometimes will call me, "Hey, Google girl." Like that's how big of a part of my identity it was. Those 10 years, from 2006 to 2016, like it was, I am so proud of you, daughter. You work for Google and I'm going to call you Google girl. And I was just like, wow, who am I? Right? Like who? And Catherine was like, we're recording this. So, but like, who the fuck am I? Right? Like, that's what I really want to say. Like, what? Like,
Beep.
who? Beep. I know. And it prompted this journey of self-discovery. I realized how often at Google I was just being like pulled and tugged in every direction by other people and forces beyond my own will, right? And so it really, that I mentioned that I took basically 2 years. I kind of worked, but like, I was also mostly volunteering with this nonprofit. I really spent that time to reconnect like deep into my soul. And I know that that sounds like really woo-woo, but it was so important for me to reconnect with that sense of purpose, that sense of knowing, that sense of confidence, right? Like, who am I? What the heck am I doing? And where am I going? And, I definitely had deep, deep moments of depression, moments where I just really questioned. And so I'll tell you a few things that helped me, right? One is use those resources that you have now. If you did leave, or if you left recently, or if you're going through something similar, use your resources to find community and help. I signed up for life coaching with the Hudson Institute. So like I went to their Life Forward program. I talked it out in a room of strangers. I found support. I would go, take retreats to Esalen. And like I would sit with these random philosophers and people under the moonlight and discuss in the hot springs, like the different kinds of like emotions and things that we were going through. And you'll find you're really not alone. And I think that's the thing that helped me through, finding my footing again, was knowing that I wasn't alone, right? And, and also wrestling with the things that maybe I had ignored while I was working at Google. So there were a lot of things about my life that I had put on hold or hiatus because I was too important. I was too busy. Everything that I was doing was like so massive in scale and like the most important thing to somebody, I don't know, somebody high paying somewhere, right? And my family couldn't possibly understand. My dating life doesn't understand. My friends don't understand why I moved from, San Francisco, which is my hometown, like into the suburbs. Why would I do that, right? Because I lost those connections. And so all of this to say, like, it's we all work to Google, so we all have a little bit of type A energy in us. And I encourage you, if you're going through it, to also apply that type A energy to seeking support for yourself, right? If you're going through those moments. Yeah, so very different angle on same question.
Yeah, no, I mean, both of you though, I heard a lot of the kind of theme of leaving because you're testing yourself and you're wanting to have an impact and stand on your own 2 feet and have your own identity, have Google not be your identity. So all great themes and something I think all of us have experienced. I want to maybe shift gears. I want to ask you both about your decision to take a break. And how you came to that and how you felt comfortable with that decision, saying, no, it's okay to not work because you go from Google, the best job in the world, to then no job. and how do you get comfortable with that decision and feel like, and also then how do you decide, okay, now it's time to go back to work? Can we touch on that one a little bit?
Yeah. Stefanie, also, thank you so much for sharing and being so vulnerable. I think you're touching on a lot of notes that we don't tend to speak about because these are things that you experience. And I certainly resonated with Google brand being an extension of yourself. And I just want to kind of add one thing to it is, I think, I had an experience of a lot of people who were builders and folks who were in product and engineering who spoke to me. And a lot of the times I got shot at my face that, oh, you're just from Google, you've just done marketing, you've done marketing for a product that sells itself, a brand that sells itself. You've never really built anything from scratch, where the imposter syndrome came in, and this kind of, it went into a positive energy of wanting to upskill and learn and test. But there's a reality of how you're facing and how you're thinking when you're at Google. You metamorphosize with that brand and think that you're that powerful person, until that's suddenly not a part of your existence. I've certainly kind of been there. Sorry, I think, Catherine, I forgot your question. What was the main thing that you were asking?
I was just asking you about this idea of taking a break, which I think, coming to terms with leaving with Google is a big decision in itself, but then also coming to terms with you're entitled to, and you deserve, and you've earned a break, and it's okay to take a break. And then also not the added fear of, oh my goodness, I'm suddenly unemployed. I mean, there's another kind of knock to identity for all you type A people who've always been overachieving, right? So just to, if you have something to share on that point.
Yeah, I think if I were to oversimplify it, I would say that there are two paths to coming to that, taking a break. Either you've been running at a breakneck speed and achieving for yourself what you need to achieve. And on that path, you've just kind of lost a lot of connections and people and family time, and people have complained and friends have complained that you haven't been there for them. And that's been an opportunity cost that you're okay to bear, right? That's happened a lot. Then you come to a point where someone does an intervention and go, hey, just take a break. This is crazy. You're losing a lot in life, and life is going away. Or there is a series of decisions where things have not worked out for you and things are not going the way you are. And you're like, okay, I need to kind of reset, rewind, find myself, do the self-discovery and get to that space. For me, it was the first one, which is I was going at a breakneck speed. I joined a startup which was extremely hungry to get to 100 million, 500 million. They wanted to be the biggest startup story in India. No amount of growth percentages were okay. You just hit your revenue targets by 300%, and now you doubled it to 800, more than doubled it to 800% of where they wanted to be. They hired like crazy. It was a cutthroat, competitive, do or die kind of a life that I lived, and I thrived on it. I loved it because I was younger. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a family. Didn't matter if I didn't go home to meet my family or be with them. Didn't matter if I didn't spend that time with my husband at the time. And so there were a lot that I was sacrificing on the end, to the point that I don't think I was recognizing myself as to who I was. And so my break came from an intervention from my husband, because while at Google, I got to travel a lot. And so I was like, oh, this is really cool. I get to travel and see different countries and different people, and I want to do this in life. And that just became a narrative that I would tell people. But in reality, I was working 14, 15 hours a day. And so my husband just kind of, pulled me back one night and said that, when I married you and when we were courting, you were like this person who wants to go see the world and travel and do so much of outside of work. Whereas when I meet you and now that I live with you, you're all about the work. This is all you do. 18 hours a day, you work. So what kind of a life do we want? And I was, I think, around 29 that time when this conversation happened, already been at Flipkart for about 3.5 years. And he said that you've done it. You've proven what you had to prove, but where life goes post 30 is what you have to take a decision on. And then tell me honestly where you want to be and what sort of a life you envision for both of us. And then we can take a call on where we go from here. Not a breakup conversation, but more about let's reset as to what kind of a life we want to map out for ourselves. And so I thought long and hard, and long story short, I kind of figured that I have to live life as well. It's not a great life if your identity is an extension of the work you're doing. And so I decided to take a break, and a true break. I got laughed out of the room, and I'll be honest, because a lot of people, when they hear that you're taking a sabbatical and you're taking a break from a career in tech to go to New Zealand for 2 years, who does that? And so I did have a lot of folks and a lot of reactions of the kind. And I went, and I think that, if you're talking about taking a running leap off a cliff, try and go to a country that you don't have any connections in. You don't know anyone. You have a visa and $1,000 in your pocket. You just left a high profile career and went down to being something to zero. And again, scaling up from 0 to 1. And it was incredibly hard, but New Zealand showed me that there is an absolutely beautiful way to live. The folks, the people, the culture, just nature, and the way they've kept their land and their country, and the conversations on sustainability and community and helping each other. It was just stuff I had never done in my life. And 2.5 years, I wouldn't regret. I can speak a lot to it, but I think that sometimes it's a far more rewarding thing than you think it is. It's scary when you're taking that leap, and one way ticket to New Zealand with $1,000. It's the best decision in my life.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's hard to.
I would add New Zealand transformation. Please go. If
I'm
you
gonna buy a
haven't
flight.
been,
I'm gonna buy a flight when we get off this call. So I share with all of you the this, you know, feeling of running off a cliff on my side, the self-doubt about, can I survive without all the resources of Google, you know, without, you know, the perks and the fun and all the good stuff. And the challenge piece of test your mettle and go prove yourself that you can survive without all of those resources. So I get the personal challenge and the personal doubt. Have you experienced the other side of that from employers? Can you really do this job? You're used to Google, where everything is given to you and you have all these resources, and can you actually function anymore without, you know, having the whole world given to you? And if so, I certainly experienced that in interviews. How did you overcome that challenge?
I'll go first. I think, I'll be honest, I didn't fully overcome it. I actually had my manager at Glint actually said to me, "Oh, but we're not Google. You can't just do these things. All of this sounds so nice, but," and I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm running a nonprofit that runs on $300,000 a year. And you're telling me that, like, I don't know how to work with nothing? Like, give me an email account and Google Docs, and that's all I need to create," right? And so I was going to pile onto something, you know, from the last question, which is like, do the math, right? That's number one. That's how you know you can survive. If take time off, is just be very, very black and white about the numbers, and then use the time to create, right? And so that's what I did. But I think, you know, back to your original question, Catherine, like, it was really, really hard. And, you know, I think it takes a lot of time to have conversations with the people around you, to obviously, you know, sometimes, and this is true of all performance related things, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of conforming to the way that they want you to do it. Not so much the way that, and this is actually true of startups too. I know that a lot of people try to cut their teeth at startups, and Rashi's had a great experience with that. Not all startups are like that. Like, I think every startup really mirrors their founders, and, you know, it depends on which one you join. You know, you really have to ask yourself, can I work with these people? Do they respect me, right? And the expertise that I could bring because I was at Google during a really pivotal time, like whatever that means to you in your career, right? And you go and you work with people like that, because sometimes it is an uphill battle, right? And not everyone is going to understand, you know, what it was like to be there. That's why so many Xooglers actually go and start their own companies. And one thing I didn't say before was that the Xoogler network is a big reason that I also, you know, and getting involved with the Xoogler network was a big reason that I knew that I'd be okay when I left, right? So, you know, all of those things, but I don't know. I wish I had a better answer there, like to like be able to flip someone's mind around about, and their preconceived notions about who you are and how you think because you had, you know, so many resources. Like, actually, no, I didn't. And like,
I know I fought every day for headcount that I never got.
right, like you're constantly fighting at Google, right? And so like it's a big perception. And so sometimes, like, I don't know, I ended up walking. That's the frank answer on my part, right? I used my feet, and I was like, if I can't be successful here because you have a belief that I only work in one way and that I'm not able to pivot, then that's what it is, right? But you will, and you will absolutely find people from companies who get it, right? And who know what you can bring. And so I encourage you to spend that time talking to people, meeting people in the Xoogler community who are also going through it. I hope that you don't have to face it. But if you do, then just pay a lot of attention about the kind of respect that you're getting in the room, and know when you're not being respected for your intelligence and time and efforts, right? And know that someone else is going to pay handsomely and respect it, right? So so that's me, honestly. I wasn't able to turn it around. I'm curious about what other people did, if even open the floor if someone's been successful at that, because I know I struggled with it, and it was a big reason that I left Lint, to be frank.
I've had a slightly different experience though. I feel like in my experience, I found that Google opened the door a lot, and most companies and startups are excited at the accessibility to this talent network at Google. And there's a lot of curiosity about what have you learned there and what have you done there. And there is definitely an expectation that you know it all. And I think on the flip side, there's a lot of pressure. I've certainly had the tag of she's the Google girl, and a lot of eyes on you on what you bring to the table and what your area of expertise is. And the challenge is yours. What are the problems I'll be solving here? And do I have the skills for it here or not? How will I navigate the limitations and resources? How do I problem solve for it? How do I do it when I don't have it? And so I think I faced the more on the other side, the pressures of what can you do and what do you bring to the table. And I will tell you this, that it's not easy at a startup. There is a lot of grind. There's a lot of, you have to really have the right growth mindset to go and learn and figure out how the world outside operates. I've gotten into heated debates about the right marketing channels and the right marketing mixes, and I found myself being an advocate for Google for too long, and that did a disservice to me, because it felt like, and I did. I think it rightfully did a disservice to me because I had bias in believing that Google had the best tools and the best products and the best platforms, where sometimes it doesn't justify the market and the customer that you're going behind. And you'll see that today that there are a lot of other products out there, in fact, I was just posting about this morning, that for analytics and for product analytics, user analytics, usage data, marketing channels, marketing automation, Google doesn't have the right answers for it. Google Analytics is not the answer to everything in the world. They don't track everything. And so having that understanding things from a first principles on how do you solve, I think is what will help you. And I absolutely agree with Steph that if you're interviewing at a startup or talking to companies, assess what's the right fit for you, and assess that would you be able to cope in an environment like this. Throwing yourself at the deep end of the ocean every time is not needed, and it's not necessary. And you can still, for example, you don't need to go at a pre-seed or super early stage startup. You could choose to go to a Series B plus, where it's 100, 150 or more, or even like Series B plus or Series C companies. And I think that's one thing I've definitely learned later in my life, is start understanding early stage, founding stage, and growth stage startups, and what does that mean from a revenue and employee count perspective, and understanding the resources and the infrastructure that company is going to have, and figure out what's going to be the right fit for you. There are some folks for whom a founding stage would be just the right fit because they just have that skill set to lend to it. And there are some who could be where, no, actually, I think Series B plus or C is a better fit for me because the size is the right. So I think understanding a lot of those kind of elements when you're job hunting, I think does a better service to you. But I will say that the grind is not always bad. It's also, it up levels you and upskills you in a very different way.
Yeah, that's great advice on the stage of the company, because the scope of the role changes, the complexity of the issues that you're facing changes as the company matures, and all those kinds of things. So finding the right fit, that makes a lot of sense. And I looked at companies at all stages to kind of get that flavor. You touched on something else about the changes in technology, which is true. If you're at Google for a long time, you use only Google systems end to end for everything. I found one of the biggest challenges of going to a startup is suddenly you're on Slack and Teams and all these things that don't talk to Google and don't talk to each other. And even just the adapting to different technologies as you go company to company. As you say, I always assumed Google was a solution to everything. Why are we using anything else, right? But you have to have that adaptability. And that's yet another reason to kind of stay mobile and stay adaptive as you move through your career, even just as a practical matter, right? So great advice. I'm going to open it up. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to pose to our leading ladies?
There's a question from Jessica about having one-liners. And if you have one particular one that you use about the craziness of leaving Google and seeking a career outside. I actually do use one, and it's the one I've already used in this session, which I say that I want to work with brands that does not sell itself. You're building the brand up. So that's my most favorite line that I've used in interviews, and I've used it in companies where I've said, I want to work for a product that doesn't sell itself, where Google does. So I don't know, Stephanie, if you have any, Catherine, even you.
Just thinking about conversations I've had with my mother, where I honestly, I don't have something pithy, not a one-liner, just a lot of stomping my feet and leave me alone. And
I mean, what's you raised about proving your mettle? I mean, I always said if my success at Google was defined by Google's success, there was no independent success apart from Google's success. If you're successful elsewhere, it's because you're building it yourself, right? And people make that assumption actually, because it isn't totally true, because frankly, when I joined Google, it was small. I built my department, but nonetheless, it's assumed that anything you did was because Google's great. And if you're there long enough, you assume that about yourself. You assume that you can't succeed independently of Google, which is why we're all here, right? Talking about this issue of what it means to not be at Google. And we're all proof that there is life after Google.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Let me see here. Somebody's asking about, Michelle is asking about burnout at Google. She said, how do you manage that at your current companies? What's different, or have your habits or the company culture changed?
I have one for this one, Michelle, is now when I interview, I have very candid conversations, and I also do a lot of reverse interviewing. That's something that I absolutely encourage you to do. Our own negative voice tracks and our experiences that are one from Google, and what if this company doesn't give me a shot and they feel like I'm not adaptive, and those kind of talk tracks can hinder you. But remember, it's as much you are interviewing the company to figure out if that's a right fit for you or not. And this stage of career and personal life journey where I'm at, I have a 13-month-old kid at home. Work-life balance is so critical and so important. Mental health is so important, as we've spoken about. I think it's a legitimate question to ask back and talk about the hours at work and what are the company benefits, and understand if the benefits are designed in a way that it actually respects your life and having a life outside of work. There is an assumption that all startups go long hours and work weekends and crazy hours. Striver was not. Our founder openly and many times spoke about the power of work-life balance and family, and gave every Friday in the month of August off every year post-pandemic. And so there are a lot of companies that are adopting more flexible cultures, but I think that in terms of avoiding it, if it's something that you value and it's important to you, find out the right interview round to bring it up. I think there's something on the early stage. And there's also, absolutely, Stephanie, 100%, they'd be lucky to have you. But then speak about it at the early stage to understand some of those things from the HR recruitment round. But I think once you are fairly confident that you've cleared most of the technical rounds and kind of made sure that the main rounds are over, I think a lot of times hiring managers will leave you with, if you have more questions, set up some time with me and reach out. That's the perfect time to go back and say, hey, this is the kind of company that's important for me, and this is the kind of life I'm looking for at the company, and does your company culture support it or not? I think is something I'd highly encourage everyone to have a conversation around.
I would say the thing that has helped me a lot is knowing who I am now and what I care about. I think I mentioned before being pulled in multiple directions by every whim, right? By like, you know, back at Google, and all of this work to ground myself and really come back into my own skin and know when my boundaries are being crossed, being able to communicate that professionally and kindly, respecting other people's boundaries, right? Like modeling what I think is right in terms of, you know, scheduling a Slack message instead of just sending it, you know, if you happen to find yourself working a little later. And then just being aware of my body and how I'm feeling. Like, am I feeling stressed out? And if I am, then I need to physically remove myself from the situation and go somewhere else, right? You know, I also make sure that I make time for therapy, and I, you know, at one point was also doing meditation teacher training. And so it was sort of forcing me to sit on the mat and just sit and contemplate. And, you know, I also schedule classes for myself after work. So I don't have kids. I probably won't have kids, right? And so, you know, but it means that I want to use that time, you know, outside of work for me, for my own development, right? And so making sure that I have those hard stops, I think has also been really helpful. So yeah, I'm also living in New York at the time anyway. I'm in Philadelphia now as of 1 month ago, but you know, prior to that, I was 5 years in New York, right? And being in New York just really just so easy to disconnect in New York. So, and everyone does it too, so that's great. Yeah.
I do want to add one more thing. I feel like with the whole burnout thing, I don't know if others feel this way, but I think when you're working in a job, there is this tendency to say yes to work coming your way. And so if decisions are being made and targets are being set, which means that it's going to be a stretch for the capacity of the team that you have, which means there'll be longer working hours, you're committing to, let's say, a couple of extra brand events for the year that you don't have the capacity for, especially at a startup. I think that I really hope that we can all make small changes in having more real and candid conversations to push back and say that if this is the budget and this is what we're trying to do, and now we're adding 5 other events to this. I'm speaking more from a marketing lens, but you know, launches, product launches, or what have you, it's going to come at a cost, and it's going to come at a cost of a team burnout and potentially people and, you know, members of the team leaving the team. Are we okay with that cost? And I think having that kind of conversation with your executive team or people who are making those decisions and highlighting what is it cost it's coming at, it's so important. And I feel like a lot of us, we don't do it. We just say yes to all of our growth targets and say yes to all of our KRs. And I think, you know, something we started doing at Striver was when we were setting KRs this year, we started talking about dependencies. So we would add like a slide for KRs, and then we'd go all the dependencies and our limitations in trying to hit those targets, if that's budget or restraint in number of people or what have you. And then cross-functionally, all teams would share that with each other and go, if engineering has to deliver this and product has to deliver this and marketing has to deliver this, these are the limitations and dependencies we're sitting on. And right on that would be, if we have a team size of 3. We cannot do this. Something's got to give. So we're either going to sign up to so many events and launches and feature launches for the year, or we're going to try and do 2 things and 2 things really well. And we live with the cost of not going to this one event where a competitor is going to show face, right? So I think I definitely think that conversation needs to become a lot more mainstream than in the past.
Awesome. Any last questions from the group, or I'm going to pose one? No more. Okay, so my last question for you guys.
I had a question.
Sure,
Right?
sure. Go ahead.
So, you know, you were the Googler girl, right? Like, if you were to attach like a moniker, like a name to your identity now, what would it be?
Oh, that's such a good question, because you'd think that after all this work, you know, I think that, so I have signed up, but I'm a big sort of believer in Buddhist like practices, right? Just for grounding self. And so in that way, right, like there isn't really a self, right? It's not really a name or a thing that I I put to myself, it's just I'm present, right, with whatever the moment is, and I try to be anyway. That's sort of my goal. And yeah, and sometimes, I mean, it sounds so actually this actually came up in a team happy hour recently. They're like, how do you spend your free time? Like I was going around asking people that, and so people got fresh and started asking me. And I was like, I am spending my free time being in love with my partner. And it sounds ridiculous, but no, I don't have a super productive answer for you. And no, I don't have, I'm not like looking at my career and being like, oh, like now the boss of all the bosses, right? Like that's not where I am. Where I am is this place of like real simplicity about my life, right? And that the most important thing right now in my life are my partner, my cat, right? Like the little things that I love, my family, right? Giving back to the Xoogler community, the people who give me so much and like enrich my life in so many ways, right? Like Chris and I are quite close. And so, it's like we're always bouncing ideas off each other and talking, catching up. So, it's just like, I just feel like that is where I want to be, right? All those parts of my life that I sort of neglected. And it's not really a name, but it's just sort of like I pared back all of those complicated things and tried to like just make it really simple. And so
Simple
maybe
Stefanie. Simple Stefanie.
Stephanie.
That's it.
It sounds very simple, but I'll take it. Yeah, sure. Simple stuff. Yeah.
And a great question. I want to be respectful of time, but a really quick one. For the longest time, I had very work persona related titles. I'm really glad that that's changing to a more personal one. And the one that I think that I'd love, I hope that this is what people are saying about me. I don't know, but my friend said this to me is I'm a hype girl because I believe in hyping up people. A hype girl.
Hype girl.
Yeah,
Cool.
I hype people up and I lift people up and biggest champion of friends. And if you want to do something and that means a career outside of tech after having a 20-year-old career and want to go become an artist, go do that. And I'm going to be your hype person. So I think that's what my friends say about me. High five, Stephanie.
It's awesome, ladies. Why wasn't I given these titles for the promo?
What about you, Catherine?
You know what? I think I'm no longer, we've all been the Google girl at one time or another. And I am now an independent entity. I am, I make my own choices. And that's a relief. So
I am me.
But listen, I want to wrap this up. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you both, Stefanie and Rashi. You guys were terrific. Thank you for your honesty and your genuineness. I mean, there's tons of thanks in the chat for you. So I want to make sure you see those before I end the call here. Everyone really, really appreciated how forthcoming you were with us. So thank you for participating, and thanks everyone who joined us. And if you would like to be a leading lady, please reach out to me directly. I'd love to hear your story. And keep joining us. Speak soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much for hosting, Catherine.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Catherine.
much.
Bye, y'all.